And we're back. You're listening to the Talkin' Boxing with Billy C show. Glad you could join us. And speaking of joining us, don't forget to follow us on Twitter. We'd really appreciate it. It's at Talkin' Boxing. That's TalkinBoxing. Well, it's that time again.
Blast from the past. We shine the spotlight again on fighters from years past.
Marciano, top-ranking heavyweight. Joe Louis is the leading contender.
Joe Frazier with a left hook. Good right hand thrown by Foreman that time.
Look at that left hook. Belt that goes to Ray Mancini.
It's Blast from the Past on Talkin' Boxing.
And this week's Blast from the Past, which is being sponsored by KOFantasyBoxing.com. Check it out, www.KOFantasyBoxing.com. Features a former world champion and boxing Hall of Famer, Carlos Palomino. Quite the fighter, and joining me right now to tell us all about Carlos Palomino is my man, Alex Perpali. What's up, brother?
Good evening, BC. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Not too bad, hanging in there. Carlos Palomino, I'm surprised we haven't done him before.
We did do him once.
Did we?
Back in, yes, back in 2013.
Oh, jeez. No wonder why I didn't remember. Yeah. Oh, well, good. You must have been able to pull all your paperwork on him then.
I did.
See, I don't save
mine. I
mine.
like those sometimes. Sometimes that helps. Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, I don't remember doing him. I really don't. Huh. Anyway, tell us about him again.
Yeah, I think it must have been the year he, or no.
No, you know what it was?
The year he was inducted. Because he was inducted in 2013, wasn't he?
You know what? It's funny. We might have done that after. No, he was inducted way back in 2004. I think the reason why we might have done him was after you had some comments about the guy that he won. Who he beat to win a title. When we don't have to mention his name right now, but him and his wife were at the Hall of Fame, and you had some funny comments about that dynamic duo.
Me? Never.
You did. You know who I'm talking about, right?
Oh, yes, I do.
All right.
I might. All right. Well, Carlos Palomino. He was born August 10th, 1949. He is 5'8.5" tall, and he fought his whole career as a welterweight, at
Which
least
I
his
love.
pro career. This was a sharp. He was born in Mexico. I'm sorry. And he lived there until he was 8 years old. He fought his whole career as a welterweight. And he was a sharp-punching, sort of stand-up boxer. But he had a good assortment of combinations there in his arsenal. And he was always very well conditioned, and he had great determination. He was the second oldest of 11 children. And he came here with his family, his parents Pablo and Maria Palomino, and they moved from Sonora, Mexico, to Tijuana, and that's where they applied for a U.S. immigration visa. And as you're well aware, Billy C., the wheels of government turn very slowly, if at all.
I heard.
And it took 2 years before the family was finally cleared to move up into Southern California. And up until that point, this was not a, we know we got those tough newspaper boys.
Yeah.
This was an 8-year-old in Tijuana selling bubble gum, and he did dabble in the newspapers, but he was mostly shining shoes as well.
I heard that Donald Trump actually helped him get into the country, didn't he?
Yeah, I doubt it.
I thought he helped him get in. But, hey, one quick question. Did he still fight at welterweight when he made his little comeback after all those years? Was he still competing at welterweight? I thought he
sure did. And I saw an article that was in Sports Illustrated right around when he was inducted. And even at that time, he was right around. He was still around a welterweight. Unfortunately, he was up there in Canastota, but I missed his ringside lecture. So I didn't get to see, how he looks this year, but I would assume. I mean, he went into the movies, so I would say that he probably stayed pretty fit. And like you said, he's he's still in his 60s now. So
hey, 65. Didn't they name a horse after him? I got a ton of them tonight, Alex. I do. I'm on a roll. But anyway, I love fighters that stay in their own weight class, especially.
That takes a lot of discipline to do that.
It does. It takes a lot of discipline, but even so, which we'll get to later. I mean, this guy. I mean, Sal Sinicola basically broke his record. It was 18-year layoff between, his last fight in 1979 until he came back. So, and to come back as a welterweight, that's pretty amazing, to be honest with you. But
he did come back against some tough guys too. Wilfredo Rivera was a pretty tough fighter.
On his way up, when you look at his resume, it looks like he was kind of. I mean, it's very strange to think it, especially in the mid '70s when boxing was as popular as it was. I mean, considering maybe it was because Ali and all the heavyweights were dominating, the press, but went all the way up until his world title shot against John Stracey in 1976. He really kind of had a lot of easy fights, at least on paper. The toughest one was Hedgeman Lewis, which was a really tough fight for him. He did have a couple of draws early in his career, and that was one of them. But aside from that, it seemed like he was being led as an opponent for Stracey in 1976, and then from that point on, it seems like a tale of another fighter, because when you look at this guy's resume all the way up until the 18-year layoff, I mean, nothing but the tops he fought after that.
Yeah, he was looked at as a 10-1 underdog going into that fight with John H. Stracey. So yeah, I mean, he like who we did last week with Ken Norton. This was that time period. There was a meat grinder in the Far East known as Vietnam. And like Ken Norton, Ken Norton, I think, joined the Marine Corps. Palomino was actually drafted, and they both joined the boxing team. So that's where they got their start in boxing, and both these guys came late to it. Palomino's first love was actually baseball. So like you said, he wasn't like this meteoric. He didn't have a meteoric rise to the top. As a matter of fact, Hall of Fame promoter Don Chargan, at one point in his career, back in '74, because he would sort of run hot and cold. He'd have one fight where he'd look decent, then the next fight he'd look sort of ordinary. But he did keep winning. But Chargan said, let's give him see how he looks against this kid Nelson Ruiz, who was an up-and-coming fighter at the time. This is in October of '74, and Palomino looked terrific. He stopped him in 6 rounds, so he had it in him. And like you said, when he fought Hedgeman Lewis, Hedgeman Lewis was one of those Black Murderers Row type characters who was kind of like a Benny Briscoe, but a welterweight version. And when he fought Stracey, he just totally surprised him. He broke him down with an incredible body attack, and finished him off, stopped him in the 12th.
I wonder why there never was a rematch with Stracey.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think they tried to have a rematch, but and I mean, considering that Carlos Palomino, including that fight, if you count that, he had 8 successful world title defenses from that fight in 1976 all the way until '78. Then he lost his title to a guy you can't really feel bad about, Wilfredo Benitez, and that was a close fight.
Yeah, exactly. He lost. When you look at his record, he has the people who beat him were really the top-notch type guys. It kind of reminds me in terms of like a modern corollary would be maybe a Fernando Vargas, because when Vargas stepped up against like a Tito or De La Hoya, He gave them tremendous fights, but he didn't win. That's the same thing you see here. When he fought Roberto Duran, it's a real a thriller of a fight, a 10-rounder, and think about that. That's his bounce-back fight. He loses to Benitez, and then he bounced back against a tiger named Roberto Duran. He got dropped in that fight, and he comes up short, on a decision. It was really lopsided. Duran really hammered him. But to think that those are your losses, there's nothing to be ashamed of that. Armando Muniz was another really good fighter that he had 2 victories over.
Yeah, and that fight I was just going to bring up because, he fought him after he won the title. That was his first title defense against Muniz. And then he fought him. That was actually, ironically enough, the last successful defense he had before he lost the title to Wilfred Benitez. And then, like you mentioned, 6 months later after that fight, he's in the ring with, hands of stone, Roberto Duran. And I think, if I recall, that might have been Roberto Duran's first or second fight at welterweight, right?
Let's see.
Because the what year was the first Sugar Ray Leonard fight? That was 80, right?
The first one was 1980.
Yeah, 1980. So I think that this Roberto Duran against Carlos Palomino might have been, if it wasn't his first, it was only his second welterweight fight. I'm talking about Roberto Duran.
Yeah, let's see. Well, he had a couple. He had one fight at 151, but you're right. It was right there before. It was 1, 2, 3. 3 fights later, he fought Ray Leonard. So it was one of the early fights. It was definitely the biggest name on his record at welterweight when he, at the time.
Then after that fight, he packed it in. He said, forget about it. And he walked away from the sport for 18 years. Now, tell us what he was doing after that. First of all, before you get into that, tell the viewers and listeners that never saw Carlos Palomino, what type of fighter was he? He was an exciting fighter to watch.
Yes, he was definitely mostly like a boxer, very skilled. The fight with Benitez and the fight with Duran, they're both exciting fights to watch. He was definitely more of a stand-up boxer, not a brawler in any way. And that was one of the things I think that I almost want to say there was an intelligence to his style, and maybe that's not by accident because he was a guy who early on in his career he went to college first of all, and he wanted to have something to back himself up, for when he quit boxing, and he majored in recreation at Long Beach State. And one of the things that was sort of interesting when he did fight, I think it was Armando Muniz. It was sort of interesting because they were both college graduates, and you didn't see that very often in one of those tough fights like that. But yeah, then he went into movies. He was in Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. He was in a Taxi episode where I think he fought Tony Danza. It's on IMDb. I think he was in a Miami Vice as well. He's a handsome Latino guy. He's got the dark eyes, the smoldering, the dark hair, and those smoldering good looks. Chicks dig that kind of thing.
That sounds like you dig them too, man. I mean, the way you're describing it. But let's move on. But was he in movies or just TV shows? The Buck Rogers, that was a movie.
Well, he wasn't in the movie though. He was in the series.
Oh.
Because it went on to it became a movie series. Yeah, it does show a couple of movies, but let's see one. I guess he's in Air America. That was when that was a Vietnam era movie. I think that's about. I think Mel Gibson's in that movie. Man.
I never heard of that movie.
Air America. I don't see another one that really. He was in a lot of TV. NYPD Blue, Hill Street Blues, Knight Rider. So early '80s stuff, mid '80s.
He played the car. No, but he was off for 18 years. What got him back? Why did he get back into boxing? Do you know?
I didn't really see what exactly it was. I think it was just the same thing that gets everybody back is, you miss those cheers.
I know, but after 18 years, the cheers could die down a little, don't you think? I mean,
I would think. But, it is interesting because, he's somebody. Boxing wasn't really, his first love in the first place.
But you know what happens? You know what happens? Leaving it the way he did, back-to-back losses, probably was eating him up. I know. It ate up my man Sal Senecola. Obviously, he never reached the level that Carlos Palomino did, but it ate him up for all those years. And when he got back in the ring in 1997, they throw him in with a guy, I guess, just to see how he would do, and he did pretty well. I mean, he went 8 rounds, against Ishmael Diaz. And he was kind of busy in 97. He fought a bunch of fights, and he fought a couple of good guys. Wilbur Garst and Arredondo was another decent fighter. So I mean, he was looking good, and until his real last fight against a 27-3-1 Wilfredo Rivera. He went 10 rounds with him, though, wasn't stopped. And then packed it in.
You know what's interesting about him, too, and Rivera is another instance, because he, how there's that ages-old feud between Mexico and Puerto Rico. Well, he has 2 losses, to the Puerto Rican side. He lost to Wilfred Benitez, who was one of the greatest Puerto Rican boxers ever. And then Wilfredo Rivera was also a great Puerto Rican fighter who ended up getting beaten by Oscar De La Hoya. And if you remember when he actually had a good fight with Fernando Vargas, I think Vargas beat him as well. And when Sugar Shane Mosley jumped up 2 weight classes from lightweight to welter, that's who he had his first fight against, was Wilfredo Rivera. And at that time, Rivera had never been knocked down, and Mosley did put him down. So Rivera was a tough guy in the 90s.
Well, Rene Arredondo was, I think he was a former champ, wasn't he? For some reason, I'm thinking he was, but the funny thing about Carlos Palomino was that although he started boxing late, when he ended his career the first time after the Roberto Duran fight, he wasn't that old. He was still in his 20s because when he made his comeback in 1997, he was 43. That's 18 years prior to that. So he was still in his 20s, right?
Yeah, and I think that there's a lesson here. I think in both these guys that we've done these past 2 weeks, I think there's a couple of things here that is similar in both of them. One is that there's no shame whatsoever in thinking, I don't really want to go die in the jungle, because both guys chose the path of the boxing team rather than active, infantry. If they're and they rededicated themselves to be able to keep boxing. And in one article I saw, Palomino even got to the point where they had said to him, look, I want you to fight at 139 while you're fighting here in the service. And he was all-Army champ in 71 and 72. He didn't think he could make 139. And they said, well, if you don't, you're going back to the base. So he made 139. So I think that's one thing that motivation, and again, both Ken Norton and Palomino, these guys are really dedicated athletes who were always well conditioned. And look at his career, Bill. He's busy. He was busy from the start. He never took like a year. You don't see like an Andre Ward year in there for him, Now, granted, the sport's a little different now, and that sometimes that does happen, where a fighter has to just sort of wait. I mean, look at what happened with Luis Santa Cruz. But I think that's one of the signs that, a guy's going to be more preserved if he stays in shape and doesn't have those back and forth sort of yo-yo in between camps where he blows up and then has to train his ass down for the next fight. It takes a toll on you.
Yeah, and that's one accolade I give to Floyd Mayweather. He's always around his fighting weight. And it definitely helps. Like I said on the show the other day, when a fighter doesn't have to worry about training camp as a weight loss, and they can focus on the game plan, I think it helps him a lot. I was wrong. He was 47 when he made his comeback, which is still pretty
amazing.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing. He was still in his late 20s when he retired. But another interesting thing, just FYI to all the viewers and listeners out there, in 1989, Boxing Illustrated, first of all, Boxing Illustrated was another one of the many boxing magazines that was out there. But they had ranked him the 37th greatest welterweight of all time, which there's been a lot of great welterweights, and considering that he was in the top 40 is a pretty good achievement in my opinion.
Definitely. Yeah, and I mean that's outside of boxing, I think. I mean, he had that recreation degree, and he has done a lot of things with kids, both in the sport of boxing and just with sort of youth groups and stuff in Southern California. So. He's a guy who gives back, and that's always cool.
Well, Carlos Palomino, I'm sure you put him in with the title bout championship computer game, and I'm curious to know who you put him in with.
I put him in there against a couple of decent welterweights that people may have heard of. The first one is this guy named Manny Pacquiao.
How was his shoulder? How was Pacquiao's shoulder? Was it okay in this fight?
It was, yeah, it was okay.
Okay, yeah.
He was in top condition.
Okay.
And I was a little surprised at this. The first time I ran it, Palomino won a split decision.
Wow.
Very close fight, but no knockdowns. Very tactical, and I do think that to some degree you will see that if you. I'll post a link to the Benitez fight, and I want to apologize because I've been remiss about posting those links. I'll get back to it. There's a last couple that I did not post, so. Palomino wins a split decision. The scores were 115-114 and 116-112 for Palomino, and then one for Manny Pacquiao, 115-114. So very close fight. But when I had them fight 100 times, Pacquiao comes out ahead. Palomino went against Manny Pacquiao, 28 wins, 64 losses, 8 draws. He was able to stop Pac-Man 12 times. And of the 64 wins that Manny Pacquiao scored, 27 were by stoppage, which, of course, Palomino was never stopped, correct?
Right, never stopped.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Okay, then I put him in against Money Mayweather. And this I thought was interesting, and sometimes the game does this. I don't know. Palomino was DQ'd in the 5th for low blows. What was interesting is he had won 3 of the 5 rounds on all 3 scorecards. So that was just starting to heat up. But sometimes, that's the time to win rounds against Mayweather as early, and then he figures you out. But when I had them fight 100 times, Palomino went 18 wins, 80 defeats, 6 draws. 4 times he was able to stop Money May. And Floyd stopped Palomino 12 times out of the 80 times that he won. And just for the hell of it, I also had him fight our friend Andre Berto, since he's getting some press this week. And he dominated Andre Berto. 73 wins, 22 defeats, 5 draws. He stopped Berto 27 times, and Berto... Of his 22 wins, Berto was able to score 6 knockouts.
Interesting. It's always funny when Floyd Mayweather knocks somebody out in this game because, he's not known for being a knockout puncher. And I wonder if you can, put in, he had cement in his gloves or, his hands were fragile and weak. And, but Carlos Palomino. And by the way, Alex does these simulations with the Title Bout Championship computer game. If you're interested in getting a copy, just visit our website, www.billycboxing.com. And on the left side of the screen, you'll see a banner and you can click that, and it will link you to where you can get yourself a copy. It's a pretty fun game for doing exactly what we're doing. It's not a video-oriented game, although the new version coming out is going to be a little more video-friendly. But anyway, Carlos Palomino, he was a former world welterweight champion. He had a career record of 31 wins, 19 coming by knockout. He had 4 losses in which he was never stopped. He had 3 draws. He went 300 rounds as a pro with a 50% knockout ratio. He was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 2004. And Carlos Palomino was our blast from the past today. And as usual, Alex, you did a fantabulous job. So even though you've been remiss of posting the links, and I'm sure you're going to correct that, but I want you to stick around. So we're going to take a short break, and Alex is going to stick around, and I'm going to get his thoughts on some other things that are going on in the sport here. So don't go anywhere, because Alex, we should be back. What do you think?
2?
We'll be back in 2.